This episode depicts the day Idi Amin wept, or shed tears for that matter. It is impossible to imagine a man of Idi Amin's stature, pride, standing, and army ranking shedding tears. Certainly, men are known to hide their cries and their pain. Perhaps this explains why men succumb to stress and behavioral diseases much faster than women. Men bottle up their feelings and rarely allow for the ventilation of those feelings. By all accounts, Idi Amin was a self-made man. He worked his ways up the army rankings and onto the presidency. He did it through army awards during colonial and post-colonial administration. Amin's colonial bosses recommended him for promotion, and so did the government of Dr. Milton Obote. In other cases, it was through machination, manipulation, and brutal methods, such as when he became the president of Uganda during the military coup of January 25, 1971. It should be noted that Idi Amin started off as an assistant cook on the rank of a private in 1946 and gradually climbed up 17 army rankings. It is known that he only skipped one rank, that of lieutenant general, when he was promoted after the military coup in 1971 from major general to general. The Ugandan Defense Council had promoted Amin under the chairmanship of Dr. Milton Obote, the president of Uganda, from brigadier to major general. Later, the same defense council, constituted by Amin, promoted him to full general in 1971 and field marshal in 1975. The subject matter at hand argues that Amin wept at the failure of his army to defeat the Tanzanian offensive in 1979. He wept in the town of Jinja, which is a city and the second largest city in Uganda. He wept at the presidential lodge when he had arrived by helicopter after the Tanzanian and Ugandan rebel forces Kikosi Maalum had entered the western flanks of Kampala city. When he arrived in Jinja, Amin announced that Jinja would be the new capital of Uganda. He declared that a bastion to resist the Tanzanian offensive would be established in Jinja along the River Nile front line. Soldiers had been armed with rocket-propelled grenades to prepare them for guerrilla warfare. However, most soldiers who had arrived in Jinja came traveling in lorries. They packed their household goods and families and traveled to Tororo, Soroti, Mbale, and on to West Nile. Many entered Kenya, Congo, and Sudan. The movement of the soldiers was unstoppable. He wept when he recalled the investments he had placed on the army in form of provisions of armaments, training, promotion, and other amenities. Soldiers have been allocated departed agents' buildings and shops. The biggest disappointment is that the soldiers had failed to contain the Tanzanian offensive. Initially, he had taken the matter lightly and never expected an incursion from Tanzanian and Ugandan militant army. When soldiers of Malire Mechanized Battalion based at Bombo attacked and seized the Kagera salient, they did it on their own under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Juma Butabika. All army units were not involved. However, when the Tanzanian army started attacking, soldiers were mobilized from different army units to face the threats from the Tanzanian army. The soldiers were greatly demotivated. It should be recalled that Maliri Mechanized Unit were the soldiers who started the coup in Kampala in 1971. They captured key army installations and civil institutions. Voila, there was the coup. Many of those who participated from the Malire Mechanized units were promoted to senior army positions. Among them were Mustafa Adrisi, Maliamungu, Eliasen, Juma Butabika, Gala, and many others. It should be noted that it was the same Maliri Mechanized Battalion who attempted to overthrow Idi Amin through a coup organized by Brigadier Charles Arube. Men of the Maliri Mechanized Battalion had a superiority complex over the rest of the army. They lived in a state-of-the-art complex at Bombo. They had the best field guns, tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery, and housing for soldiers. They boasted of their capacity to defeat other army units. During the Tanzania and Uganda militant onslaught, they received heavy beating that greatly demotivated the entire army. A senior Tanzanian army officer reported how they discovered army frontline on Ugandan side was highly mobile. They had an easy session, knocking the mechanized army from strategic positions. Winning the war was the pride of the Tanzanian nation. When Amin captured the Kagera salient, he never expected the fury of the Tanzanian army and the many Ugandans who were exiled in Tanzania and abroad. After the Ugandan coup of 1971, President Nyerere mobilized an army legion called Jeshi la Mugambo. The purpose of Jeshi la Mugambo was to forestall a military coup in Tanzania. Millions of Tanzanians were trained in defensive warfare. The Ugandan attack was an opportunity to mobilize the Jeshi la Mugambo into the Tanzanian army. There's a large-scale enthusiasm and patriotism among Tanzanians. After a brief training, they were sent to the front lines. The initial success evolved into a full-time war in the whole of Uganda. The country was liberated. Such was the pain of Idi Amin that made him weep. He had started to prepare for the war with Tanzania in 1971, when he overthrew the government of Dr. Milton Obote. Such was the pain in Idi Amin that made him weep. He had started to prepare for a war with Tanzania in 1971, when he overthrew the government of Dr. Milton Obote. Then he carried out a large recruitment exercise to the army and carried out major army exercises. During an attempted rebel invasion into Uganda from Tanzania, there were many skirmishes on the border. The Ugandan Air Force bombed the town of Mwanza. Actually, the African Union intervened and brought peace. It should be observed that when Lieutenant Colonel Sule, the commanding officer of the Air and Sea-borne Battalion, moved his troops to the front line from Tororo Barracks, he was hit by a shrapnel. Some say it was from Tanzania, while others say it was from Uganda army soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Sule was Idi Amin's right-hand man. During the war between Israel and Egypt in 1971, Sule was among the Ugandan soldiers who were sent to Egypt in solidarity with the Egyptian army. His death weakened the morale of the army. Another army unit that pulled from the front line was the Marines unit based at Bugolobi. Amin at one time used this unit to police the army, especially the Maliri Mechanized Battalion. It is the Marines who put down a coup attempt by men of Maliri Mechanized Unit in what was known as the Brigadier Arube's attempted coup. The soldiers of the unit under Brigadier Taban Lupai packed their belongings from the barracks and moved to Sudan, where most of them came from. Later, Amin traveled to Soroti, West Nile, from where he boarded a plane to Libya and later on to Saudi Arabia. All along the way, he rallied troops and prepared them in the hope that they would fight a guerrilla warfare against the Tanzanian government. Bringing up the issue of Amin weeping is not to say that men do not weep. They do. If they do not do it, it creates a time bomb that explodes in many other things. This was not the only time that Idi Amin is known to have wept. He wept when he lost his mother, a woman by the name of Asa Ate. Asa was a medicine woman who had great influence on Idi Amin. The time is when the grave of his mother was desecrated when Ugandan soldiers attacked Koboko, after it had been occupied briefly by former Amin soldiers in 1980. Destruction of the grave site was done in revenge. The other time that Idi Amin was known to have wept is when he wept and mourned. When he was nearing death, he called the name of his mother, Asa Ate, and his two sisters, Dee and Rafal.